I'm going to begin with the word of prayer and get into this story, the way of the wise. I just pulled this off of Google this morning. I thought it was a cute little picture of an owl up there with a hat, and I don't know, just kind of fit. So let's close our eyes and have an opening prayer. Lord, I pray that this message this morning, even though it's on a very different subject from the one that I just was talking on, I pray it will be practical and people will feel like they can implement it, and that it would give us courage to become more like you. In your name I ask, amen. About 11 years ago, almost exactly 11 years ago, I got a call from a friend wanting me to join an organization that was just starting out called the Adventist Agricultural Association. And if any of you know me, you probably know about this organization. And I've been serving as a board member of this organization for the past 11 years. It's been a privilege, a huge learning experience. You learn a lot about people and politics and feelings and all sorts of things, your own faults and failures. It's a very interesting, it's really easy to be critical of organizations and institutions and these types of things until you're having to manage one, and then you get a lot more sympathy, I found. It's just crazy how that works. But about 3 years ago, the board asked me to join the organization in the capacity of being the board chair, which I'd been just a regular board member and done some other officer duties, but nothing of the chair level. And it's been a huge growing experience. And I just want to talk a little bit about some lessons learned, some experiences that have taught me a lot, and some things that have been very beneficial to that position and to just life in general, and kind of how the Bible fits into that as well, as far as just counsel we have there and things along those lines. And I call it the way of the wise. And by no means am I saying I'm the wise person here, but ways and methods that people that are much more experienced, much more wise than I've hopefully been able to learn and will continue to learn from, and hopefully these lessons will impact. But I'll start with a bit of a story. So about a year and a half ago, I got a call from a volunteer that was fairly major within the Adventist Agricultural Association. We just call it AdAgra, so I'll just refer to it as that from now on. And this person was frustrated, upset, angry, belligerent, and their frustration was all centering upon me. And there were quite a few personal attacks, and I'd never had a situation quite like this happen before. And I don't really want it to ever happen again, but it took me a good 3 days to just kind of get over the jitters of the situation. Has anyone ever had anything like that? Does that resonate at all? It was like, wow, what just happened there? And it kind of came out of left field and these types of things. And so that kind of, I kind of asked the question there. That was the next slide. I'll probably do this repetitively where I'll actually ask the question before the slide's up. But anyways, this happened, and it kind of set into motion some things that have really grown me as an individual through that experience. But moving back to you, this experience that you had happen to you, I just want to ask you, while there we go. While they, the individual, in your experience, while they were in the process of inflicting this verbal barrage, did a verse like this happen to come into your mind? Any verses like this, by any chance, happen to come into your mind? As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. That didn't enter my mind, just to let you think. Or what about a verse like this? A fool despises his father's instruction, but he that regardeth reproof, especially the second part there, but he that regardeth reproof is prudent. Probably, no, probably not. Not for me. If this came into your mind, you can probably just leave right now. But this is not what came into my mind either. Things more like the nerve of this individual. Anyways, these types of things. Or what about this one? He that refuses, I'm going to just skip all these thus and thises. He that refuses instruction despises despises his own soul, but he that heareth reproof getteth understanding. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. Easy concepts, hard to implement. Very difficult to implement. But we're going to talk about how to implement them, maybe some techniques in order to implement them, because these are super powerful ideas that can make the difference between, well, almost everything. Marriage, business, life, friends, how you deal with people when they disappoint you, everything. So I have 5 parts that I'm going to just briefly go over here that I'm just calling the way of the wise because this idea kind of comes from Proverbs. And these are them: the mental space, the desire for wisdom over ego, that getting that in the right connection. Number 2, follow the signal, not the noise, the principle of radical openness. 3, take ownership, see your place in the problem. Number 4, come up with real solutions, make it count. And number 5, execute or make it happen. Okay? So, here are just a few more verses. There's so many in Proverbs. There's probably at least 20 or 30 of them that I found, but we're not going to go through all of them. But I'm just going to read a few more of these here. Better is the open rebuke than love that is concealed. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Of course, if you can internally absorb that instead of use that against someone, it's obviously the preferred way here. A reproof entereth more into the wise man than 100 stripes into a fool. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better is it to be an humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoils with the proud. This mental space, before, and I have to say, luckily, I did not lash back out at this individual and was able to give myself a little space and time to process what happened, which I can only imagine what would have happened if I actually would have lashed out. It would not have been pretty. It wouldn't have, nothing good would have come of it. Like they say, don't wallow with the pigs in the mire type of idea. It never really just makes you as muddy as them. But the idea of the mental space, the desire for wisdom over pride. This is a tough one. Like I said, all of these things, easy concepts, hard to implement. I found myself having to ask myself the question after that particular call: what do I want to have happen here? I mean, I can tell you what I was feeling, what I wanted to have happen here. It was things like, you know what? I think it's time for this person to go. And as board chair, if I bring this up before the board, I think I can make that happen. I think I could make this happen. I'm in a position to get rid of this problem. I probably wasn't quite in that position, but I felt like I was in that position. But the thing was, is my particular pride here, like, how much is it worth, and how much damage, if I actually implement this, is this going to cause? Because it's going to cause some sort of collateral damage. So there is these proverbs and these ideas, this concept of humility, and it's like, well, do I trust that this is actually the best way to go? Because sometimes when you're in the moment and you're in the feeling, you don't want to believe an alternative perspective. And but here's one of the benefits if we take this idea, this path of humility instead of pride. Set the pride aside. I like that little rhyme. Anyways, if we don't set the pride aside, what's going to be the consequences? Well, here's the thing, is that this person was very upset, and they had a lot of things to say, but there might have been something that they said that was true. And if there was something true and my pride was getting in the way of that, it means that I wouldn't necessarily be able to adapt to new information and possible situations coming my way as far as leading in this organization. If my pride is in the way, what if what they said about me, what if some of that said, maybe what if they were the only person that actually had the courage to tell me to my face something that I really needed to hear? Then if my pride is too big, I wouldn't be able to evolve and get better. If my pride is too big, maybe I become complacent. Maybe because I'm not willing to hear, I think everything's fine. So not only will I not be able to evolve, but I'm going to get complacent where I'm at. If I'm too prideful, I lose connection with reality. I won't be able to see the world as it really is because pride is so large and it's in the way. And because I have so much pride, I won't be able to self-assess. I won't be able to get a perspective of really what's going on inside of me. And so because of all of these reasons, getting into this mental space of setting the pride aside, this path of wisdom, it puts us in a strong position to be able to make changes and adapt in a powerful way to push, whether it's our family or personal projects or organizations or churches, forward. But because of pride, and I was struggling with it, believe me, in this situation, the potential of a blessing coming out of the situation wasn't highly likely, at least not in this. So thankfully, I'd already started to put some of these ideas into place and was at least not able to respond in kind to this individual. And it made all the difference in the world. But before the trial comes, you kind of have to be in that mindset. And the next part, and this has really helped me, this is something that I repeated in that situation to kind of help me set the pride to one side and actually try to hear what this individual is saying. And this is the point number 2. Follow the signal, not the noise. Radical openness. When people come at us in a vicious manner, for one thing, there's usually something that's driving it, but there's a lot of steam there, and it can kind of cause a bit of a fog and steam effect, and we can't necessarily see what they're actually saying. Personal attacks are usually used because an individual is super frustrated with something, but that's probably not if they were themselves to kind of take a breather afterwards. They probably are going to say something like, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have said that, because it wasn't really what they were after, but they're very frustrated. And so these are 3 kind of a loop that I try to run in my head when things like this happen. First, detach. Try to put yourself almost in a third-person situation. How can I stand as a third person and try to observe this discussion going on from a bit of a detached perspective? Because once I'm detached, then I have the capacity to actually orient myself. What's going on? How is this person reacting? Try to separate the signal from the noise. Also, in this kind of comes back to the idea of humility. I call it the rule of 1%. And this is the idea of, even if 99% of what this person has to say is bogus, I want to be open to the 1% that might be true, because that 1% is worth the value of this discomfort. And that is, and like it says, it is the idea of radical openness. But I can't tell you how powerful this loop is when you're dealing with a situation, especially if you can come into it and someone starts. It's like, okay, detach, try to separate, step back from the situation, orient myself, okay, what's happened, what possibly could be going on here that is influencing the situation other than what's meeting me right in my face. And then the idea of the humility, the 1%. If there's 1% of something that can do here, no matter how it's delivered, I want to be open to that 1%. Then step 2, and this is what I call take ownership equals own the problem. Now, this is really difficult, but I want to give an example of kind of how this is done, at least how, by God's grace, I was able to deal with this in this particular situation. After this discussion, as you can imagine, I was in a very just emotional, like I said, it took a few days. One thing I did is I actually called one board member and I said, look, basically debriefed with someone, okay? Get someone else's perspective, because when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to get a perspective and you're really emotionally engaged. So that can be really helpful too. And that really helped to diffuse the situation. Also, give it time. Time works on our behalf. And it was 3 days before, well, maybe even a little longer before I actually got back in connection with this person. But giving that time, there were a few things that became very apparent. And this is a little history of the Adventist Agricultural Association. We started out as basically a group of farmers wanting to make sure that there was an annual event where we could all come together and talk about farming. Simple enough, right? Well, as it grew and more people started coming and people started donating money towards the organization, we really never set any type of filter as far as the type of things as an organization we would get involved with and the type of things that we wouldn't get involved with. Because agriculture is a very broad sphere. There's a lot of different ways that you can take this. And so we're like, well, why don't we publish a curriculum? And why don't we do an online development program? And why don't we do this and that? And so what had happened is that the organization had gotten so heavy in different ideas that we hadn't built a very strong administrative center and core. And so basically the reason that this volunteer was so frustrated is because they weren't getting the support that they needed to be able to execute their job. And the only people that they had to count on was the board. Well, the board was made up of a bunch of full-time farmers that didn't have time to give this type of attention. And so this person wasn't evil. They weren't a bad individual. They'd done a lot of good work for the organization. The problem is that we had set them up for failure as a board. As me, I was a part of every one of those board decisions of allocation of funds, of bringing this individual on. It was our fault, and more specifically as board chair and the leader, it's my fault that this happened, that it even got to this position that this person could be this frustrated with me. They were saying a lot of things that they were saying were true. Now, did they need to be belligerent to bring that point across? No, they didn't. But it still doesn't mean that it wasn't our fault, and specifically now it's my problem, so it's my fault. So no excuses. The next thing is no blaming others. We're the leaders. It's our fault that the organization got to this point. And there was an opportunity to own the problem. The question is owning it. It takes work. It takes sacrifice. It's been a long road this last year and a half to actually take ownership of this mess that I made, that I was a part of. I'm the senior board member. I've been on the board longer than anyone. A lot of people have left over the years. I'm like the only one that served for 11 years. And it's just like, I've been a part of all of this problem. But I mean, that's where the first slide, you have to be in this mindset of humility coming into the problem, because unless you are humble, how can you take ownership? But the world is dying for ownership. I mean, just think if our politicians took ownership, how different the United States would be. Just think about if you and your own family or your own situation were able to take this radical level of ownership. How powerful and how many problems would just be solved. So, no excuses, no blaming others, own the problem. But it's not just about owning the problem, it's about coming up with a solution. And the solution in this case was, number one, to realize the problem and the root cause of the problem. What happened? We overextended, we didn't build out correctly, we got this person in a very unenviable position without the correct support that they needed. And now what are we going to do? Well, sometimes there's limitation of funds, limitation of resources, so you have to prioritize and execute. You have to say, okay, what's the most important thing here, and then start with that. And in this case, we basically decided as a board that we needed to help these organizations become, these initiatives that we had started, to become their own nonprofits or basically shut them down, because it was no point in continuing a bad system and hurting more people. So that was the solution, which we have and are yet in the process of executing. The second thing is to not let this problem happen again, is that we needed to create clarity for the organization of what the things we would say yes to and the things that we say no to, because just to free these initiatives to become their own nonprofits wasn't going to solve this, wasn't going to make sure that this cycle wasn't going to happen again. So we had to come up with practical solutions and go through the painful process of basically saying, what are we going to say yes to? What are we going to say no to, so that we don't get back into this problem in another 9 years? So those were the solutions that we came up with. But to kind of bring this back to a practical, maybe more of a day-to-day issue, Aubrey and I went to a conference last week, and there was a lady that has kind of adopted some of these principles, and she was talking about a situation in her own family. And I guess she orders quite a bit from Amazon. And if you order from Amazon, you know that you get boxes. To PAX, do you order quite a bit from Amazon? Okay, so they do. So, a lot of boxes, and these boxes build up. And it's funny, in our house, because we live so far out of the country, we do order quite a bit through Amazon and just order in general. And so these box piles can get fairly large and invasive and kind of crowd your space out. And every once in a while, Aubrey will have a pyromaniac day and go out and just burn all the boxes. And she really enjoys that because she doesn't like them stacking up there. But in this particular lady's situation, she comes in one evening and her husband's in the garage and there's these boxes. And this lady had actually taken the time to cut the boxes and stack them down and put them in a nice pile. But for whatever reason, her husband wasn't feeling so good that day. And he kind of snapped at her and said, you know, these boxes in here, you putting them in here, this is a real problem. Which infers, if you're on the other end of that receiving remark, you're the problem. And she kind of had to very quickly, and it's amazing how rapidly these processes can kind of step in. She said, okay, here's an attack. What do I do with this? Detach, orient, think about the 1%. Okay, these boxes are here. Yes, they're in the way. Try to objectively look at the situation and not engage emotionally. And she was able to say, you know what? You're right. It's my fault that they're in here. And I need to come up with a solution for how to fix this. Well, her husband also had been trying to train on these particular situations. And he's like, you know what? That was really bad of me to say it that way. I mean, I'm a part of this family as well. It's my fault. I should have taken responsibility. And they were both able to take responsibility. The power of this tool is that when one person takes responsibility, it opens the door for the other person to take responsibility, to say that it's okay. I mean, have you ever had a situation where someone has taken responsibility and then you're like, actually, part of this is my fault too. Why don't I help you with this? Has anyone ever had a situation like that? Maybe not. Maybe this will be a first for you, which would be amazing. But it's amazing how generosity and thoughtfulness begets generosity and thoughtfulness, and it becomes a positive snowball effect. And I won't go into details, but I mean, this has been very helpful in our marriage for Skylar and myself as well. I can't tell you of how many things could have gone exponential that didn't because of that. So, solution, not an excuse. In this case, the couple, the solution that they came was that both of them had very busy schedules, and that their teenage son could now be responsible for getting the boxes out. So taking responsibility does not necessarily mean that you're the one that has to do it, but it means that you're taking responsibility for organizing and helping to get the solution executed for the responsibility. So this doesn't necessarily mean you do everything, but it means that you help get the system set in place so that resolutions can come. So the last point here is seize the initiative. So it's not just about detaching and being open. It's not just about admitting that you have responsibility. It's not just about taking ownership. It's not just about coming up with a plan. It's about going the full circle and executing on that plan. Because that's really where the cycle, you got to follow it through all the way so that it works. And, seize initiative. And so, just in a practical way, it's like, look, we forgot to get to this appointment on time, and we always seem to forget, or I always seem to forget, in this case, not we, because you're taking responsibility, right? I always seem to forget, and it's a problem, and I realize how much problem this has caused you. My solution is that I'm going to set a timer so that I don't forget. And guess what? I'm going to set a timer right now so that happens. So you're following through the whole way. So here's actually my last slide. So that just a bit of a review. First, the mental space. Desire for wisdom versus ego or pride. Got to be there first. Second, follow the signal, not the noise. Radical openness in that three-part step of basically kind of detach and step back, orient, and the 1% rule. Take ownership equals see your place in the problem and accept responsibility. Number 4, come up with a real solution. And number 5, execute on that solution, whether it's you or whether it's helping put in place the mechanisms to do it through other people. I'm happy to say that because of that one individual in their belligerent conversation with me, it has, by God's grace, set our organization on a firm path for the future. Instead of divulging back into chaos and causing personal issues, we've helped our initiatives become their own 501c3s, therefore alleviating the pressure on the organization. We just finished hiring a chief operating officer to help create more administrative structure. We've set a long-term vision and mission for the organization and also created a filter so that this doesn't happen again. And it's getting to the point that, Skylar and I are actually having a baby. You've heard about the baby shower. Travis coming in January of 24. And as of January or when January 7 comes, I'm actually stepping down as the board chair from the Adventist Agricultural Association, because now other members of the board feel that they can actually take on the chairmanship because we've relieved the pressure off of the board so that things aren't so chaotic now. All of that benefit because by God's grace, I was willing to take ownership. Imagine what the other alternative could have been. Imagine if I would have taken offense, we would have fired this individual, which she would have been very disgruntled. She probably would have come back on the organization, potentially, and bad-mouthed us to everyone, which would have caused a whole nother level of collateral damage. We wouldn't have solved anything as far as the organization's concerned. We would have been in a worse position, not a better position. And who knows what would have happened? I mean, one person can do a tremendous amount of damage. And one thing I've learned through this whole experience is don't burn any bridges that you don't have to. Because you never know if you'll need to cross them again. You just never know. And I'm happy to say that this individual thinks a lot better of me now than they used to. It's funny, I was just talking to them a year ago, and they're like, "You've really grown as a leader." And it's just like, well, in some strange way, I have you to thank. It's like, isn't that crazy? Just how does that work? Well, I mean, never underestimate the power of humility. Never underestimate it. It's powerful. And I just want to close with this thought. When Adam and Eve were in the garden and they sinned, and God came to them and said, "Where are you?" And then he said, "What happened?" What did they do? What did they tell him? Sorry? Yeah, they blamed, well, each other and God, right? This woman that you made gave me to eat and I ate. This serpent you made caused me to sin, right? And just because other people's make mistakes, obviously, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just would have been fascinating to play this a different direction. What if Adam would have taken responsibility? What if he would have said, this was my fault. Eve, she's new around here, newer. You've entrusted me with this garden responsibility, and I failed. And I don't know. I know that you said that the penalty for, well, this is a whole nother sermon. It's just why the tree, why the thing. I mean, it's just the idea of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and objective versus subjective moral reason. I mean, it's a huge topic. I mean, basically what they did was a lot worse than just eating the fruit, and we can go into more detail maybe at another sermon. But, I doubted you. I allowed this to happen. This wasn't Eve's fault. I should have been more faithful in this, and I'm sorry, and I deserve what's coming, and I'm sorry about this, and it's my fault. I don't know what would have happened, but I can almost guarantee you it would have been better than what happened. But what did God do? Well, there were some judgments, because even when you take ownership, there will be a certain level of collateral damage for people making mistakes under you. But right then and right there, through those curses, he basically said, there's this concept of the wounded healer, or the wounded savior. And at least as far as I believe, this was talking about Christ. Was it God's fault that humanity fell? No. He said everything was very good. He made a perfect world, no reason to doubt his justice, his goodness, or his law. but they doubted. But even though it wasn't his fault, as a good leader, he took responsibility. And he came to this world and he demonstrated sacrifice. And imagine the level of humility that it requires for, God is more than just a being in a particular location. He's the source of reality itself. So, I don't even know what that means, but the idea is that the source of reality itself took upon a responsibility that wasn't his, but because he's a good leader, that's what good leaders do. And he came down to this world and he poured his life out on behalf of humanity, that humanity could have another shot at this. He created and he opened the door for success. He set the example so that we can do likewise, so that we have the opportunity to do this. And as humility begets humility, he has, just think about where the world would be today without Christianity. We wouldn't be here, that's for sure. At least not like this. The world would be a different place. Even though Christianity has failed and many people haven't lived up to the standard, and that's for sure. Just think of what would be if he would have never taken responsibility for something that was not his fault, but because he's a good leader, that's what good leaders do. So, yeah, there's yet much to learn in the whole dynamic of leadership, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our churches, whether it's in organizations that we're involved with. And even as kids, the idea of like when your parent says, hey, what did you do here? Taking ownership, coming up with a solution. This is for any age, any space, doesn't matter. These principles apply across the board. But we have Christ as an example, the ultimate example of the ultimate person that ultimately did not have to take responsibility that did. And so, no excuses. No excuses. So, like it says, there is a cross for each of us to bear. And it's amazing to me that cross symbolizes the pouring out of self and the annihilation of pride at the ultimate level. And I'm grateful that Christ doesn't necessarily ask us to bear that cross alone. Not only does he require it, but he also gives power to fulfill. And we're not alone in this struggle. But I just ask each of you to think about how much good there could be if each of us were to take on these principles. It's incalculable. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the standard that you set, but not a standard to overwhelm us, but to encourage us. Because if we have you on our side, we know that all things are possible. Be with us this week. May we take up courage. May we realize that the gospel is built for hard times. We pray that you would be with Brian's family, that you would give them courage and strength. And Lord, may in some way we live our lives more fully, more in a blessed way, to in some way make up for the life that was lost. That when we meet Brian again in your kingdom, in some small way we can say that because we took on these principles, we were able to make the world a little better, and that we can praise you forever with him in eternity. In your name we ask, amen.